Good afternoon. Welcome to the Space Madness Podcast. This is your host, Jeff Nosanov, and we are up to episode 27, which is really exciting given my original goal of 50 in a row. So today we have a really interesting guest, Dr. Joe Meany, scientific consultant and president of the Interstellar Research Group. And that's a mouthful, and interstellar research and propulsion and travel, all that, big inspiration to a lot of people at NASA, outside of NASA. So welcome. And why don't you tell us just what that title means?
Yeah, absolutely. So in a nutshell, the mission of the Interstellar Research Group is ultimately to build towards enabling the first interstellar human mission. And, obviously we understand that that's not something that is going to be achievable in the founder's lifetime. That's not something that's going to be achievable in my lifetime, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't start working towards it.
I love that. And just to interject, that reminds me of how Da Vinci built or designed a helicopter that could not be built for 300 or 400 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, we take inspiration from Da Vinci. We take inspiration from people like Gerard O'Neill, who designed the eponymous O'Neill cylinders that were meant to, be off-world habitats, whether they exist within the solar system or whether they were traveling to distant star systems. And, the Interstellar Research Group actually started off as what was called the Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop. It was started by a group of science fiction fans that had grown up reading Heinlein and Asimov and all the others. And they all went to science fiction conventions together. So they all had this kind of like in-group, and a number of them actually had a Friday night dinner club. Well, conversation eventually turned to, hey, wait a second. We're all scientists and engineers that work for like Oak Ridge or NASA Marshall in Huntsville, Alabama. What if we actually just like got together in a hotel room one weekend, got some pizza, got some of our fun friends together, and talked about the legitimate possibilities of road mapping towards interstellar travel? And that, took everything from not just the propulsion, but habitat engineering, what would need to happen for the evolution of culture, all sorts of things like that. And so eventually the group continued meeting. They continued hosting these small conferences, and eventually word got around that this was going on, and somebody from Wichita State University in Kansas had said, hey, I want to hold an interstellar workshop too. And at this time, we were still known as the TVIW, the Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop. And so when we started trying to plan and promote that event, people were like, Tennessee is nowhere near Kansas. What are you guys doing? And at the Kansas meeting, then somebody said, hey, we want to do this in Arizona at the University of Arizona. And so we were like, okay, apparently the Tennessee thing isn't working anymore. We've got to come up with a new name. Yeah. So that's when we rebranded to the Interstellar Research Group. And so now we host our conferences all over the United States. We've held one with McGill University in Montreal, Quebec in Canada. And in 2024, we actually hosted the first European Interstellar Symposium with the University of Luxembourg and the Luxembourg Space Agency over in Europe. So, we're really expanding our reach. We're really expanding our scope. And it's a great time to be thinking big about interstellar topics.
Yeah, and I think I had met some of the TVIW people at the DARPA 100-year Starship Conference 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, Mark Millis was a big supporter of ours. He was on our board of directors for a number of years before retiring. And
Frontiers in Propulsion Science was on my first day at JPL in 2010, I asked the library to get a copy of that, and they did. So I read that cover to cover. So that was that was interesting to see, to try to separate the serious work from the work that you couldn't quite tell if it was serious from the totally unserious works. Maybe that's a thing we can come back to later. But I'm curious, how did you in your life come to this subject matter, and what led you to study physics and chemistry and commit to this incredibly challenging vision?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a bit of a weird roundabout. I did initially start out undergrad looking to get into mechanical engineering, but it turns out that I wasn't super good, or at least not particularly interested in getting good at the physics principles. I think it was, ironically, electricity and magnetism that kind of turned me off. And so I pivoted away from doing a mech engineering undergrad degree. And so at that point, I kind of gave up the possibility of working in the space industry. And it bummed me out for a little while. But what I did find out that I was really good at was chemistry. And so I was like, you know what? At least I have something within science that I am good at. I'm going to just stick with that. So
can we go? I actually want to go back even further.
Sure.
What was your first memory that you can point to about the sky or space, universe, that sort of thing?
Man, I don't even really know. Like, it's just always seemed to have been a part of me. So, like, as a bit of an example, parents were avid outdoors people. We would go camping as families, as a part of a large group of families. And so I would spend a lot of time in like rural Vermont and being able to look up at the stars and everything like that. But at the same time, I also remember when I was in like elementary school, I saw, I don't know if it was on Nickelodeon or what, but the space camp commercials always grabbed me. I saw the big kids and like the gravity chairs and the command consoles. And I remember begging my parents to send me to space camp, and they were like, no way. But I was like, well, let me just call this toll-free number to get this infomercial VHS tape. And they were like,
yeah,
is it free? And I was like, yeah. And they were like,
Shipping and
okay.
handling, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. They paid like $5 or whatever to get the infomercial tape. And I wore that tape out. I watched that so much. It was like when I was a kid, what would I watch? I would watch that space camp video. I would watch Indiana Jones, and I would watch Star Wars. And it was just like so much interest in exploration and space topics, things of that nature. So, and then I was in late elementary school when my parents got a special edition of Life magazine. And this special edition was just called Life in Space, and it had a glossy astronaut on a spacewalk on the cover. And it was just talking about all the shuttles and all the latest information about the planets that they had. And I carried that in my backpack everywhere I went. So yeah, space has always been kind of an innate part of who I am.
Sure. I can relate to that. I have a few distinct memories about the Griffith Observatory and stargazing in Lake Arrowhead, California. I just think that for some people, once that gets its hooks into you, nothing's going to compete. So that's it. So back to college. You discovered a skill, a talent in chemistry.
Yeah. And so I put space kind of on the back burner. I started studying organometallic compounds. So I was making compounds that essentially had a metal atom sitting in the center, and they were surrounded by these carbon-based molecules. And depending on what metal you chose and the arrangement of the things that you hooked around it, change the different properties, whether you're trying to get different colors out, or if you're trying to get different binding affinities, maybe you want to create catalysts or medicines, things of that nature. That's what organometallic compounds are.
And you were able to do this as an undergrad?
Yeah. I was part of a research group with Professor Colin Abernathy at Keene State College. It's a tiny liberal arts school in southwestern New Hampshire.
Abernathy, wasn't that the name of Indiana Jones's mentor too? I just recently watched Raiders of the Lost Ark with my son. I think that, anyway.
Interesting.
That'll
No,
be fun.
I hadn't caught that up. Now I
Yeah.
need to go back and watch some Indiana Jones. That's the second time this week I've talked about Indiana Jones.
Well, always a good topic. Okay, so where is that university, by the way? I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, it's a tiny little liberal arts college in Southwest New Hampshire. So
New Hampshire. Okay.
it's about 30 miles east of Vermont and about 30 miles north of Massachusetts.
Okay.
So
Cool.
yeah, right there down in the bottom corner.
Great. Well, what a wonderful opportunity to be able to. Sounds like it was playing around, not to trivialize it, but explore, and build an interest in. Were you able to publish anything as an undergrad? I mean, that'd be pretty cool.
Not as an undergrad. There were some of my colleagues that worked in the lab a little bit more, and they did get to publish. So
Cool.
I was balancing schoolwork, a
Sure.
job at JCPenney,
Okay.
as well as my undergrad research.
Okay.
But I did get some early training in like organizational leadership
Mm.
because I was part of the chemistry club in undergrad. And so eventually I was president of that. And
Okay.
for the 2 years that I was president, we won awards from the American Chemical Society
Okay.
for undergraduate programming, because we would host things like demonstrations with the local fire department on how to properly use a fire extinguisher. So
Okay.
they would bring us outside onto the main sidewalk stretch of the college, and from that they had this special apparatus where they could, start a small controlled flame. And we would get to use an actual fire extinguisher on a fire to learn about the principles of how to correctly put something out.
Yes. I once saw a demo or something like that in Middleton, Wisconsin, where I lived for 2 years, by the local fire department. It was actually fascinating to see the tools and how quickly they can cut apart a car, and how a fire truck has been optimized to have the first thing you need, the first thing you grab, and behind that is the second thing you need anyway. So anyone listening, if you get a chance to see your local fire department do a demo, that is worth going to. Anyway, okay, so sounds like a very promising early start that both in chemistry for you, that both fed your interest and kind of painted a picture in your head, or at least got you dreaming about something. So where'd you go from there?
Yeah. So after undergrad, I spent a few months at a textile mill. It was my first job out of undergrad, working for a place called Warwick Mills in South Central New Hampshire. Not much to say there. It was an interesting job. It was as a research technician. We had some cool contracts making specialty clothing, basically. Warwick Mills these days is known for making like specialty protective gloves, things of that nature.
Okay.
But
see, that reminds me of the fire department at JPL, because the JPL has its own fire department, and that's because the kinds of fires they have are very unusual and not the kinds of fires you can just spray water on. And I was never able to get a full explanation, or just I was really curious about that, but just took me back to that, looking into the fire department there, wondering, how do you prepare and stock a fire department for a place like JPL? Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're concerned about things like burning metal shards or
fuels.
Fuels especially, absolutely. Hypergolics that will burn just on touching air. That's a big deal. And, I imagine we'll get there and talk about my time at Savannah River National Lab, but basically same thing.
Okay.
But from Warwick Mills, I was actually accepted into the graduate program at the University of Alabama. And it's kind of funny because when people hear that I'm interested in space, they're like, you went to Huntsville, right? And I was like, nope, main campus, Tuscaloosa.
Okay. Interesting. See, I find that coming from the West Coast, you don't have that assumption. People who want to work in space, it's like you go to Caltech or UCLA or something. But here on the East Coast, of course, actually, you're in DC, right?
I am now, yes.
Okay. Where are you from originally? I should have started there.
New Hampshire, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the assumption of Alabama makes sense for rocketry and all that stuff. Okay. I'm sorry. Which national lab was it? That seems like it was a big step. Must have really motivated you to really be part of the kind of national science apparatus.
It was, yeah. So did my time at the University of Alabama. I was working there on molecular electronics. So I was making single carbon-based molecules into circuitry.
Wow.
After I got out of grad school, I spent a couple of years in private industry. So I was doing some analytical consulting work and then started as an application scientist for basically a specialty science equipment manufacturer in Athens, Georgia. And then after that, that's when I started at Savannah River National Lab. And I was using my nanomaterials background to look at special types of catalysts for basically deriving new industrial processes for making like commodity chemicals. So we were looking at new ways to make ethylene. We were funded on a DARPA project to make food from plastic waste. And we were working on ways to put these catalysts as well into things like high temperature, high strength plastic composites for vehicle manufacturing.
Okay.
So we got a lot of really cool opportunities while I was at SRNL.
So at what point in all of this did you start to think about interstellar work and how you might contribute to that?
So I was in grad school back at Alabama. I was a third-year graduate student when I got a Department of Education grant to work on some science communication techniques with one of the undergrad professors. And so he was like, Joe, you've got to create a brand. Help me create supplemental content for my Chem 101 students, but you got to come up with a brand. And so that I came up with the Crimson Alchemist because the University of Alabama is the Crimson Tide. I was a chemistry student, so alchemist stuck, so Crimson Alchemist. And fast forwarding a bit, I got to talk at DragonCon in Atlanta about the applications of nanotechnology for space.
Okay.
Which is when one of the audience members came up to me after the talk and was like, hey, my husband couldn't be here, but he would have really enjoyed your talk. We should get together later and introduce the two of you. And I was like, hey, that's absolutely great. Who's your husband? Oh, he's Les Johnson, chief technologist at NASA Marshall.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, so Les's wife, Carol, came to me and introduced the two of us, and we hit it off immediately. And so he invited me out to the 2014 Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop at Oak Ridge. So I attended that. I got to, sit down and talk about old school science fiction with a lot of folks, especially people that had been writing for a while. Larry Niven and Jerry Purnell had attended some of these events. Yeah, absolutely. And so I got to tour as a graduate student Oak Ridge National Lab. Like we got to see the neutron spallation facility. We got to see the uranium production facility. We got to see the Triton supercomputer. Like it was cool.
Wow.
And so that's when I was hooked.
Sure.
But I was also really intimidated because I was like, all of these people are like 25 and 30 years older than me. And they were like, no, Joe, stick around. We need your help.
Yeah.
We need to like reach other people like you if this kind of mission is going to survive.
I know the feeling, and that now being older now, I see that they desperate for younger people to get hooked.
Yeah.
And try to find way, keep it moving forward.
Yeah. And so over time, that was just what I did. I tried to contribute in a way that built the organization to continue trying to recruit other folks like myself, and now recruiting folks younger than myself.
I know the feeling.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I've done in the 10 months that I've been president is try to orient our activities and especially orient our volunteer opportunities to try to introduce people that are interested in space but otherwise wouldn't be targeted for direct space opportunities.
Sure. So that actually connects really in an interesting way, I think, to the DARPA 100-year Starship work, which it became very clear in trying to develop a concept for that. It really would require every profession is the wrong word. Basically, every sector of human endeavor, every human endeavor is what I'm looking for, to actually make meaningful long-term impacts. I would imagine in the same way to get the initial sailing ships across the oceans, you needed you needed the people producing food and the communications people and the people making paper and so on. So that takes me to perhaps the meat of the subject, which is how do you balance sustaining the organization, building growth mechanisms into it, while also trying to make meaningful impacts on the substantive work, road mapping, technology, and so on, particularly when you have this classic science fiction problem, which says you should never leave the planet because 10 years from now, there'll be a better way to leave and it'll get there first.
Yeah. Well, from an organizational standpoint, I've kind of taken the opinion and directive that we are trying to lift up the people that are volunteering for IRG.
Mm-hmm.
We are an absolutely all volunteer organization. None of us get paid. We have an absolutely shoestring budget at the moment. And I know that's going to raise another question about how would we fund such an endeavor if we are a shoestring organization. But the ethos is, our volunteers are coming to the organization with a passion for space, with an interest in future tech development. So they want to be up close and personal with the things that are going on in interstellar space. But we also want to give them opportunities to grow in the ways that they are earning their livelihoods. Like, I chose to rise in the ranks of the Interstellar Research Group because organizational leadership, I think, is on the roadmap for my overall career. So if I can go ahead and put on my CV and my resume that, yes, I have responsibility for 50 downstream direct reports, then, I'm able to go into other, organizations and say, yes, I know how to manage and work with people across all these different organizational functionalities.
Sure.
But the same thing is true even for our frontline volunteers. So our video editors are trying to beef up their skills so that they can, go to new clients and say, here's my portfolio of work. Or we have one of our volunteers that is eyeing a pivot from her position in manufacturing procurement and wants to use her organizational skills to become a director of operations. And so she's taking on responsibilities that look like a director of operations would have.
That is brilliant. I wish I had thought of that in my proposal to DARPA 12 years ago. Really, really clever way of I can see how that becomes self-sustaining in a way that lets people work alongside their real job, so to speak, but also building useful skills both for the long-term vision and for themselves. Really powerful stuff. So what substantive work on interstellar travel can we do today other than building more people's interest in the subject?
Well, so that's a great question. And it kind of goes back to your point that it will involve all aspects of humanity in bringing people along for the ride. And what's nice is recently, back in October, we had our 9th Interstellar Symposium in Austin, Texas. We partnered with the University of Texas at Austin, and the theme of the meeting was Distant Worlds, Neighboring Opportunities. And so the whole ethos of the meeting was, yes, we realize there are lofty goals for which, we're trying to achieve, but anything that we are going to develop technology-wise, culturally, or in the humanities will have a impact on Earth. And in fact, going beyond that, it must have an impact on Earth, a positive impact on Earth. And so one of the things that we do as a part of our meetings that is slightly different from other space conferences is, yeah, we have the propulsion technology, we have the engineering talks and everything like that, but we go beyond that to include discussions and lectures about ethics, philosophy, anthropology, economics. And we actually even had a religious philosopher give a lecture at this last one talking about what we understand the long-term evolution of religious practices looks like. And so these are things that we need to understand in order to make human expansion, like, forget about Interstellar for a moment. We need to understand these things just to get beyond our planet. You know, people need to be able to live and cooperate better than they are on Earth, even if we're going to think about establishing permanent settlements off-world.
Yes. And in fact, one of the examples I used for long-term institutions in the DARPA work was the Catholic Church, actually. The ability to, which has construction projects that take 100 years in some cases and more. I think they're still working on that cathedral in Barcelona, or maybe it just got finished, but it's been decades, if not longer. So I really like that focus, especially the humanities, because we can work on those things even if it's not cutting metal and building, especially as we don't have access to the energies yet, right, to actually go there.
Yeah.
But human history suggests that if nature will permit it, we will figure it out someday. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, there are some people that suggest we're not going to enable interstellar missions, even precursor missions, until we become like a Kardashev 1 civilization. And I still don't necessarily think that we need to get there. You know, I understand that Breakthrough Starshot was really ambitious in trying to develop all the laser propulsion systems and the material scientists for the sailcraft and the communications to beam back the eventual pictures of Alpha Centauri and everything like that. And so that's really interesting, but there's other work we can also be doing in the meanwhile.
Yes, I think of it as, it gets philosophical quickly for me, regardless of where I start. But to me, it becomes becoming a species or a civilization worthy of such ambitious efforts. You quickly get in. It's easy to get bogged down in questions of like, well, why should we spend money on this? What's the benefit? I could point to all the studies showing the 7x return from Apollo and the spin-off technologies and all of that. But it's sort of the extreme version of the human motivation to explore that has gotten us this far, to where you and I can be looking at screens and using half the elements in the periodic table to have a conversation through thin air, right? So it is almost self-evident that we should go where we're drawn to, But how do you work around, or how do you think about selling this idea? If not, maybe that's the wrong word, but convincing people who see it as even more extraneous than the space program, which some people unfortunately feel. How do you connect these extremely long, almost philosophical ideas to everyday people?
Yeah. The, everyday person essentially understands, or even if they don't know it right off the bat, it is easy to tell them that the space program benefits them because they use GPS,
Sure.
Right? And so being able to draw that immediate through line, human exploration in space allows things like Uber, Waymo, DoorDash, what have you. It allows the gig economy, for better or worse, right?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, just to add on to that, I said this in the last episode, but I want everyone to know it, that apparently, I read this recently, apparently the Apollo program bought half the transistors made in the U.S. in the 1960s. So it really was Apollo that propped up that entire industry as it was emerging. So that's walking around money for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
Who,
that's really interesting. I actually didn't
yeah,
know that
yeah. Who
that
knows
fact
what
either.
it was? Who knows what future ambitious efforts like that would nurture and so on. Anyway, back to what you were saying.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I saw a statistic recently that um, America is set to double its manufacturing output rate of uh, semiconductor wafers by 2030. And yeah, a lot of those things are going into our Internet of Things gadgets. They're going into our smart cars. They're going into new and better phones, but they're also going into satellites and things of that nature. I don't even remember the numbers of billion-dollar industries that
Yeah,
semiconductor is, but that it's a big deal. But anyways, to get back to the question of why Interstellar is important. So, one of the things that I like to say is that because we don't know the paradigms under which we have to adopt to reach the stars, it is such a lofty and far out goal. We don't necessarily have the constraints of modern economic and governance models to tie us into particular technology roadmaps. And so,
okay.
while yes, there's a bunch of people trying to make money off of developing data centers for space or power beaming for energy generation on orbit or nuclear reactors for the moon and mining helium on the moon, those sorts of things. Those are all, precipitated off of somebody needs to make money to do the thing, and it needs to happen in the next 10 or 15 years. And we kind of take the tack of we want to entertain technology development possibilities or economic or cultural development opportunities that are not shackled to that kind of paradigm. We
I
want to
see.
allow ourselves the freedom to think in a way that is not tied to,
Sure.
how will I say this, US centric, inherently
Understood.
capitalistic models.
Sure. I understand what you mean. I'm thinking like imagine the ancient Babylonians coming up with a venture capital model.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see what you mean. And another example comes to mind of removing barriers on your brainstorming and having really good things come out of it. For example, the last two methods of landing on Mars, the Spirit and Opportunity rover landed on bouncing airbags, literally bouncing to a stop. And I would actually, when I was still there at JPL, I tried to dig up the story of how that was proposed and how do you even create an environment of psychological safety that lets someone say that out loud,
Yeah.
right? Something so absurd, but actually, given the Martian environment, ideal, right? And likewise, the sky crane, where you have this ridiculously complicated system that it turned out was the only way currently to land something that large twice. So I see, I really like the point you're making that when you strip away almost all common sense, like we can't do this now, we can't send humans to Alpha Centauri now, but there's actually a benefit to taking away all of those boundaries to imagination, and you never know what's going to fall out of it. It's almost like, it's like the Apollo project to the extreme. The Apollo project being, we had no idea what technologies would fall out of it, like blood, like filters for blood transfusions and kidney dialysis and microelectronics and all that other stuff. But
flexible
and that,
electronics.
Course, yeah, and that of course is not why they did Apollo. But we know from that experience that you set a goal that absurd almost as it was in 1961. All kinds of cool stuff falls out of it, and in some cases even would have been paid for itself only because you let yourself dream that big. So I really like that explanation. I think it brings out the best of people.
Yeah, because when you're talking about having to procure a lot of energy or procure a lot of sustainment mass, things of that nature, it would have natural turnaround consequences on things like asteroid mining and the like.
Yes, planetary defense.
Exactly.
Yeah, I thought, see, when DARPA, So my first proposal ever was the DARPA 100-year Starship, and it took me many years to realize how ridiculous of a scenario that was. Because from the very beginning of my work in mission development and architecture and all this stuff, it was this ridiculous challenge that was even poorly expressed by DARPA, or at least we felt like it was, because we couldn't tell if they were trying to, if their goal was actually the technologies that would flow out of it. Like I thought, well, they must be after energy storage technologies if this is the goal, right? I don't think I ever got an answer to that, but that's the kind of, I think, kind of concrete benefits that can flow out of a challenge like that. What you're talking about is even orders of magnitude greater, because it involves all these other areas of human endeavor that would need to advance for something like this to happen.
Yeah, because it's like what new financial models could
Sure.
come out of it? What new business models could happen when you start to think about setting up multi-generational, century trusts or whatever it happens to be.
And even that's not new. I believe Benjamin Franklin set up a trust. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I'm not hallucinating this. That still pays for some facility in Philadelphia or something like that.
I think that's true. I think that's right.
Supports, like it's the library system or something like that. So we know that humans can think long term if motivated by, I guess I can only say, the right vision, whatever that is, and it can survive. It can survive industrial transformations, and certainly the Catholic Church has survived 2,000 years of unrecognizable human changes, changes in society, and so on. So, and I think the changes are coming faster and harder than they ever have. Multiple major ones within a single human lifetime, which is something I think about. How I think I read somewhere that the average medieval peasant was exposed to less information in their lifetime than is in a single New York Times Sunday issue. And that really makes you think about, what our minds are really wired for after 200,000 years of that level of input. So I guess it suffice to say, lots of changes. So what does the next 5 to 10 years of this organization look like for you? Where do you see it going and your role?
Well, I'm building us for a trajectory of continued growth, especially expanding on a number of our partnerships with different space organizations. So in 2026, we will be having the second European Interstellar Symposium. We're partnering with the University of Padua, but holding the actual event in Venice. So that'll be over in Italy. In 2027, we have a partnership with Georgia Tech. So we'll be holding our 10th Interstellar Symposium in Atlanta, Georgia.
Well, that's where I live, so I'll be there. Let me know how I can help.
Well, like almost all of our board of directors live in and around Georgia.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm in DC right now myself, but my wife is still down in Atlanta, lives right across the street from the aquarium.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, offline, we should talk how I can help. Very interesting.
We definitely should. Absolutely. And then we are in early discussions right now for 2028 being the first South American Interstellar Symposium in Peru.
So I kind of want to, as we build towards the end here, I really want to explore a little bit. It sounds like you're finding, unsurprisingly, everywhere you go, you find people interested in this. It seems to be a universal dream or goal. I mean, I find that really powerful, that through all of our different cultural and historic experiences, you find people in Peru who dream about this stuff. And it just brings to me one of my favorite things about space exploration is that it's something we all share, period. We all grew up on this little planet. So it's an unavoidable reminder of our shared heritage and similarity.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, aside from just the symposia, every year since 2017, we've been giving out scholarships. And we've been growing hand over fist in the number of applications we receive. So we actually give out scholarships all the way from undergraduate up through graduate and professional level students. And so I would like to see in the next 2 years, our scholarship giving double.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking to raise funds for that. And then we're working with our advisory committee and other external partners to figure out how we can start to establish a philanthropic trust to start to enable actual interstellar research. So right now, all of the participants within the IRG symposia are generally academics, but they're attending on their NIAC dollars, or they're attending on their DoD dollars, or whatever their funding source is. But we want to find a way to establish our own fund so that we can start thinking like a breakthrough is or was.
Or like the from Ben Franklin Trust or what have you.
Exactly.
Okay. So sounds like a series of noble goals. So you recently published a book. Can you tell us about that?
I did. And actually, it was a long-term effort by co-editors Les Johnson and Ken Roy. It is a series of 3 textbooks published by Elsevier. So it's an academic book. And it's a 3-volume series called Interstellar Travel. The first book deals with the purpose and motivation. So it has a fair amount of ground setting or level setting chapters in there. So dealing with the concepts of distance and energy and what is, the effect of relativity on these kinds of travel equations. But it also looks at questions like, are we ready to go to the stars? Should we even go to the stars at all? So it really brings in a heavy helping of the philosophical aspect, which is incredibly important. And the second volume deals with the actual undertaking of the mission itself. So it looks at what do we know or understand about advanced propulsion methods? What do we understand and know about space habitats? What do we know about different strategies to get people to the stars, whether it be hibernation or world ships, generation ships, things of that nature. So it goes into that a lot. And then book 3, After Arrival, deals with, exactly as it sounds, what is going to happen to the communities after it arrives. And so my particular chapter within that book is ensuring settlement survival and sustainability. And so the chapter centers on a lot of aspects of chemistry and materials science to orient the reader to think about if you're plopped in a new solar system, what are the things that you need to do to establish yourself in that new home? And what kind of technologies do we know about now, like 4D printing or active shape-changing materials? What do we know about advanced energy capture methods? Things like that.
Okay.
So that we can build out a settlement that doesn't expand faster than its capacity to support the people arriving.
Fascinating. Well, I really want to thank you for joining me today on this episode of the Space Madness podcast. We've gone over a lot here, a lot to think about. Any final thoughts for the audience?
Feel free to reach out to us if any of this sounds interesting to you at irg.space.
Awesome. I'll make sure to put that in the podcast upload. So thanks again. And in another 10 years, we should see how far we've come.
Love it. I'll be a little bit grayer then.
I'll still be just as bald. Thanks.